Now, it could be anything. Those are probably not the best examples, but all of us in this room can probably think of at least one thing that we're holding on to. We have hope towards a promise that was given us, a word that was given us, whether it was by an individual or even more importantly, from God, that we have not seen to come to fruition yet. It has not manifested itself yet. And David had found himself in a similar situation. Let's look at that promise at 1 Samuel chapter 16 and verses 12 and 13. It says in verse 12, so Jesse sent for him, meaning David. He was dark and handsome and with beautiful eyes. And the Lord said, this is the one, anoint him. So as David stood there among his brothers, Samuel took the flask of olive oil he had brought and anointed David with the oil. And the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon David from that day on. So as a young boy, David had received a word from God. You will be the next king of Israel. But as we read through the accounts, one piece of essential information is missing. There's no date stamp. God never indicated to Samuel, nor David's father, or before David's brother, this is the exact time frame that you will take over as king. He just said he will be the next king. Are you waiting on something? Something that God had promised you a while ago. 3 years have passed. Maybe 4. Maybe 5. Maybe longer. And you have yet to see the manifestation of the promise, the word that God has given you. When you're waiting on something that is of great value to you, if you let it, you can reach a point of disappointment, discouragement. It can start messing with your mind. You begin to wonder, maybe I didn't hear right. Maybe the word that I received from God didn't meant this. Maybe he meant this instead. And you start to compromise on the word that you've received. Case in point, I can remember in 2013, 2014, I don't remember exactly which year, but let me just go with 2013. This was the season of my life I was really hearing God's voice clearly, but I didn't recognize it. I can remember hearing this distinct voice as if somebody was in the room, in the house with me at different times of the day. And I had never heard God's voice before, and I'm the only one that's in the house. Am I losing my mind? I literally felt that way. I can remember one evening, home alone, sitting on the couch watching television. And for whatever reason, this recurring incident always happened in the same pattern. I would hear the voice first from over my right shoulder, and the voice would say to me, one of two phrases, it never deviated, share your story. And I would look to my right, because the voice sounded like it was clear as day. Somebody has walked into the house, into the room that I was sitting. I know I was the only one home, and I'm like, okay, what was that? And then I would settle down and dismiss it. And then the voice would appear over my left shoulder, and it would say, tell your story. Again, I would freak out a little bit, eventually calm myself down, and then the voice would sound as if it was directly in front of me, and it would repeat again one or two phrases, share your story. And this went on for weeks, and I didn't tell nobody because I didn't know what to make this thing out of, and if I share this with anybody, people are going to start thinking I'm crazy, because I never have at that point in time in my life have heard God's voice. But it finally got to a place where this thing was driving me crazy that I had to speak on it. So I went to my roommate, who I pretty much share almost any and everything with the exception of this one crazy voice that I kept hearing. And so I said to Felicia, I said, I think I'm losing my mind here. She looks at me puzzled, like, what are you talking about? I said, I keep hearing these voices. Hearing voices? What are you hearing? What is it saying? And so I repeated what I just shared with you with her. And as I'm telling her the incidents, her puzzled look on her face starts to reshape itself, and she started to look amused. And I'm saying to myself, I'm saying, why she's looking like this is funny? Because this is freaking me out. Why she's starting to laugh about it? Because I don't think this is funny. I think I'm losing my mind. And then finally when I was done, she says to me with laughter in her voice, Deidre, that's just God speaking to you. And I looked at her like she was crazy, like, God speaking to me? God ain't never spoke to me before. What are you talking about, God speaking to me? Something inside of me put on the brakes and was like, wait, listen to what she's saying. She continues to say, God is trying to tell you something. So listen. And the next time this happens, inquire what he wants. What he wants you to share. My buddy Felicia generally always gives me very good advice. And I would say more than 50 to 60% of the advice that she gives me, I take it in whole. I value her opinion. But this was the craziest, stupidest thing I have ever heard her say from my perspective. What is she talking about? So some time passed, and sure enough later, I'm home alone, sitting at the table, on my computer, and the voice starts. Same pattern. Over the right shoulder, over the left shoulder, and then in front of me. But this time, I'm not as freaked out as I was before, but a little nervous, because I couldn't get the courage to ask, what are you talking about? And the reason I was struggling with the courage, because I really don't know who I'm talking to. I'm hearing this voice as if it was my best friend sitting in this room having a conversation with me in the flesh. And here's this voice that is clear as day, and I have no clue what it is talking about. I trust my best friend, and I finally take a deep breath and ask, share what? I can't describe what happened next. The best way I could describe it is I got this image in my head that looked like a film script. And all it did was flipped so quickly, but I was able to see every picture that it generated, and it just flipped from one picture to the next. And in the imagery was a history of the not so good parts of my life. And then the picture stopped. And when the picture stopped, I knew exactly what this voice wanted me to do. And these were my exact words. You are out of your mind. I'm not doing that. And what God wanted me to do was share my story in a book in regards to what led me to a homosexual lifestyle. And how in the process of living out that life for so many years, eventually I received my deliverance. Tell your story. Share your story. Now, it took me a minute. It took almost a month before I finally got to a place, and that's another story in itself, before I finally agreed to do what God had asked me to do. And you notice I just said God asked me to do back then, and I don't know who it was. It was just weird to me. But it took me about a month before I finally got to that place. When my heart finally got to a place where I finally could agree to do it, I wanted to do it. I could see some of the good that would come out of it. I could see the pain that would come out of it, but also the healing. I can see how many people, lives that I possibly can help by telling my story. But at the same time, I could see how much I can lose in the process. And that's where David and my story starts to sound alike. When you flip through the pages of his story. Oh, it was a grand privilege, an honor for the King of Kings to approach a young boy, the youngest Jesse's sons, and say, I have a promise for you. In the future, you will be king over all of Israel. In the same instance, God was saying to me when I finally got to a place and I agreed to tell my story, to share my story. He said to me, tell your story, share your story, and I'm going to make your name great over all of this earth. Someone who has come from humble backgrounds as I have, just like David was a young boy who came from a humble background. For someone as great as God to come to you and ask you, not demand, you could choose to reject it, to take a part of your life and share it with the world to save the few who are willing to receive your story and compare it to their life. I have something greater for you. But God left something out. The processes, the challenges, the struggles, the loss to attain the promise. God excluded that part when he asked me share my story. I was clueless. I'll be honest, I could perceive some things, some challenges that would have come about from taking on such a task. I remember one of the things I said to God in regards to his request, nothing would come good of this. In other words, this would create a lot of inconvenience for me. I mean, my family is already dysfunctional, and this is only going to create a greater divide. I mean, I share some things about my life, but I'm very particular and private about certain things. And you're asking me to expose myself, my bones, the skeletons in my closet, to be transparent, to show my pain, my frustration, my anger, the shameful parts of my past, revealing possibly other people's flaws that have caused me to be in this place in the first place? What is the gain from it? I couldn't see it. It didn't make sense to me at the time. But then God said something to me that finally put me in a position to see the value behind the promise or promises, because he gave me more than one promises. This one that I share with you was just one of several promises that God had given me at that particular time. And basically all he says, but Deidre, you're not living. And I wasn't. I wasn't living. I was going through the motions, allowing others, my mom, my brother, my sister, other family members, to use my story, my pain, the things that had destroyed my life at a very young age, as they please. I know for a fact these individuals who I love have shared my story in many different circles to benefit them. But at this particular junction in my life, more than 3 decades later, I have yet to use my story on a public platform to help others. Worse, to help myself to heal. And that's basically what God was saying to me. You need a healing. You need an internal cleansing to improve your life. In life, there's so much stored up in you, but it is all locked up because you have not learned to let go and heal. You've allowed for far too long for others to tell you how to walk, how to talk, what to say, what not to say. And now I'm telling you, I'm asking you to stand up on your own 2 feet and speak with power and boldness that I know I have gifted in you, and tell your story. There's a lot at stake. A lot. Your life, your children's life, and so many people who are in the circle of your influence that are waiting for you to tell your story. So with the promises that God had given me, it was conditional. See, that's the piece that I think oftentimes we miss. We hear or receive the word that God has given us. I promise you this ministry. I promise you this church. I promise you this fortune. Or I promise you this wife. I promise you this husband. I promise you this lifestyle. We hear those beautiful words that God speaks to us, and we receive it. But we fail to acknowledge that those promises are conditional. Conditional to what? Conditional to enduring the process.